Hi, I'm Linda Sudlesky. I'm an instructional designer and accessibility specialist for Learning Design Services here at UMass Boston. I co-teach a summer course online in the instructional design graduate program called Information Design and Visual Literacy, and I'm a disability advocate who has firsthand experience with disability. Katie?
Hi, I'm Katie Raditz, and I'm the coordinator of accommodations and services at the Ross Center for Disability Services. I taught for 10 years at UMass, and I'm currently studying instructional design at UMass. Linda and I are looking forward to talking with you all about inclusive design from our perspectives. In this session, we will explore accessibility, disability, and inclusion. Before we begin, we want to mention that we will be alternating the terminology person with a disability and disabled person because we understand that different people have different preferences when it comes to the language they use to refer to their disability. It's a good idea to always check with the person you're speaking with about their language preferences.
So we'd like you to take a moment now to look at these stairs. What do you notice? How might these stairs differ from stairs we're used to seeing in front of buildings? Please put your answer in chat. Or are we doing a poll on this, Katie?
Yeah, we have a poll. So
okay, so we also want you to look closer. Is there something missing? In what ways does the design seem good or bad? Could it create issues for, say, people who are blind or in a wheelchair or children? So we just opened the poll, and it's an open-ended poll. So tell us your thoughts. What do you think about these stairs? You should be able to see the poll right on the screen and be able to enter in your answer. I mean, they're kind of really cool looking when you think about it, stairs. So we have 2 people who answered. Anyone else who wants to give some suggestions or thoughts about these stairs? Maybe a better question is, how would you go up these stairs? Or down? So give it a couple seconds here. Right, I'm going to end the poll and share the details of the results. Can everybody see that? Can everybody see the results, the details? Ellen and Katie, you're both muted.
On my end, I don't see what you're sharing.
Oh yeah, because when I click view details, it tries to get me to log into Zoom to view the details. So it's not pretty much displaying them in the open-ended format. Ellen, do you have any thoughts about that?
Oh, you can't read them to us. Let me see what happens when I'm going to click view details right now.
Okay. Thank you, Ellen.
Okay.
Meanwhile,
so I do see answers. I see answers.
Do you want to read some of them to us, please?
Yes, I do. Hold on one second. Okay, what do you notice about this staircase? We have an answer that says not enough railings, not evenly designed, visually beautiful, but not functional. That's one. I have another one. Ramp missing. Inconsistent design, which I guess is the same as not evenly designed. No accessibility, easy to fall, not accommodating for the blind or disabled. It goes diagonally, not enough handrails. Those are my 5
Right.
answers.
And those
Great.
were all the things that we noticed as well. We found it really interesting why the handrails were only placed to the right and not in the sloped areas, but then thought, well, then people couldn't walk directly down them, because I think that's the goal, that you could walk right up or down the centers of the stairs. But if somebody is using the ramp and has a vestibular disorder or loses their balance, they could easily fall and go right down all the stairs. If somebody is blind, where's the guidance for that person to traverse these stairs? So I was really curious what it looked like in use. So I grabbed this photo really quickly right before the session, and it's not forwarding very well today. Sorry about that. But so people do go right down the stairs, but you don't see anybody using the ramp in this particular picture. But I am curious about that. It does also seem like where the ramp is, it is made a little higher, like you have to step up from the ramp to continue down on the stairs. And I imagine they can't make it too much higher, or else people would only be able to use the stair part on the side. So it's a complicated design, but the intent was accessibility, which is important.
So according to the Office of Civil Rights, accessibility or making something accessible means that a person with a disability is afforded the same opportunity to acquire the same information, engage in the same interactions, and enjoy the same services as a person without a disability in an equally effective and equally integrated manner with sustainably equivalent ease of use. This is also true for all students, regardless of their ability. All students should have equal access to all materials.
Thinking beyond education, what is accessibility, right? What does it mean when something is accessible? You know, we throw the word around, but a lot of people are like, well, what does this mean? What words come to you when you hear the word accessibility? Access, having the ability to interact with someone or go somewhere. We're going to talk more about what this means for education and students in classes and in our academic community. But before we do, Katie will tell us the definition of accessibility. Or disability, actually. I'm sorry.
So when we talk about accessibility, we think about disability. And when we talk about what disability means, the CDC defines it as any condition of the body or mind impairment that makes it more difficult for the person with the condition to do certain activities and interact with the world around them. Linda, do you want to talk about Section 504?
Sure. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 protects qualified individuals with disabilities. So under this law, individuals with disabilities are defined as persons with a physical or mental impairment, which substantially limits one or more major life activities, has a record of such an impairment, or is regarded as having such an impairment.
Something to add here, not all students with disabilities are registered with disability services like the Ross Center. And there are a number of reasons for that, which we'll go into later. These students still deserve access to the materials. So we have another poll here. Right, Linda?
I can't see the polls, so it's up to you.
Okay. Yes. All right. So poll should be on your screen now. And the question is, what are some possible reasons a person with a disability may not register with disability services? And there are a number of options there for you.
And the options are, they don't want to call attention to themselves, they're undiagnosed, they don't have access to neuropsychological testing for diagnosis, they just don't have time. or all of the above?
We've got 7 of 8 people have participated.
I think you could end the poll.
Okay, yeah, 8 of 8 now, so that's great. Okay, so I'm sharing results. Can you see all the results on your screen? Okay, so we had one answer for they don't want to call attention for themselves, and the majority of the answers was all of the above.
And I think it's common that students don't want to call attention to themselves as having a disability. Sometimes people have had bad experiences with those in authority after disclosing their disability. So they don't want to risk being in that situation again. And sometimes might see, and we're not saying that's the better solution, but they might see, falling under the radar is a better solution. Maybe they didn't have time to do the paperwork, and that's also very common. But really, any one of the choices is correct. And so all of the people who answered all of the above, that is the best possible answer there, because it could be any one of those.
So now on the screen, we have a look at disability from 1980 and present. And it compares seeing disability as a personal attribute versus something that is context dependent. According to the Microsoft Inclusive Toolkit, in 1980, the World Health Organization defined disability as a personal attribute, saying in the context of the health experience, a disability is any restriction or lack of ability resulting from an impairment to perform an activity in the manner or with the range considered normal for a human being. A lot has changed over the years with how we look at and talk about disability. Today, the WHO says that disability is not just a health problem. It's complex phenomenon reflecting the interaction between features of a person's body and features of the society in which they live. I love that definition, particularly the interaction between a person's body and features of the society in which they live. So now let's look at this let's look at this phenomenon from the perspective of a person with a disability. On the screen, we have Carl. Carl uses a screen reader and wants to read the newsletter sent out to staff that contains a photo of the campus map and no text description of what others are seeing in their eyes, with their eyes. This is an example of disability as context dependent. If this newsletter contained text description of what was shown visually, then Carl would have the equity of content, because the community of people in Carl's society, the staff who created the newsletter, made it so that it's accessible to Carl.
So we also have Jaya. Jaya is deaf and goes to watch video about how to perform certain aspects of her job. And the auto captioning wasn't edited, leaving Jaya to miss approximately 15% of what was said. Just a lot of information. There's also not an ASL interpreter available either. So this is another example where those creating the job training could have developed digital materials which met everyone's needs. Another example of disability that is context dependent.
And I'm going to share a third example. Naya is being asked to use virtual reality or VR in order to complete an assignment for a course. Only Naya has a vestibular disorder. She gets very sick from using a VR headset. The instructor has not provided any alternative or equitable activity for Naya to complete this assignment.
Lastly, let's take a look at students who wouldn't be requesting an accommodation but benefit from inclusive design. Both Taryn and Sam have busy schedules and watch lectures while they're on the T. When the train is loud, which is often, they have trouble hearing the narration. Unfortunately, there are no captions available and they miss valuable content.
The examples that we've shared show how Microsoft points out that disability is not personal health condition. However, disability is mismatched human interactions. This is huge because it gives us the power to ensure that someone's disability doesn't impact them negatively. So that more recent WHO definition is important to think about when we're disseminating information to others. Will the information I'm producing be accessible to everyone? I also want to mention at this juncture that on Tuesday and Wednesday, Linda will be covering making content and courses accessible. And that session will expand thinking on who benefits from the efforts and why we undertake those efforts to be inclusive.
That said, I'd like to use myself as an example. The fact that I have well-controlled migraine and epilepsy is not what causes a disability for me. It's my environment when there's flickering lights of fluorescent lighting or CFL lighting, or if someone walks into the room with strong perfume, which could trigger the migraine for me. Or say perhaps the virtual reality app, which has a similar effect to me as the student we shared. In those apps, like, they require you to navigate in a game-like environment, and it could trigger health issues. So often, environmental triggers created by people or structures, such as lighting or a video with too many flashes, can significantly change the course of my day, at least. And if I avoid that designed element, I may be excluded. An example of this, there's a really cool gallery virtual reality software that allows people to move around in this, like a virtual gallery setup. And then you can square up to a piece of art and enjoy it. If someone uses this software to show an art exhibit and doesn't give an alternative means of accessing the images of art, I will exclude myself to avoid the negative neurological impacts of viewing the program. The question is, did I exclude myself, or was I excluded by means of design that wasn't inclusive? This is largely known as the social model of disability. Ultimately, the social model of disability proposes that disability is only disabling when it prevents someone from doing what they want or need to do. The problem lies not with the individual, but with the society that is preventing access. So we have another poll for you, and we're going to ask you, what might your approach be to inclusive design? Is it proactive? Do you try to produce inclusive materials? Reactive? You follow the accommodations given by the Ross Center? Or, I just haven't given it much thought. And it's okay to just answer honestly what you've done to this point. And this is anonymous completely. So we'll give it a couple more seconds for people to respond. Okay, so seven out of 7 responded, so we can close the poll and share the results. So most of you, it's great, you're proactive, you try to produce inclusive materials, and that's wonderful. And some haven't given it much thought, and that's okay too, and we're glad you're here, because that's what we're here to do, is think about these things and help facilitate further action about them. So we could stop sharing the poll, and I'll go to the next slide.
So now that we know or have kind of discussed what disability is, let's talk about how people are impacted by various disabilities. It's important to consider that most disabled people experience more than one of these impacts for any given disability. So think about how much your brain does for your body. If your brain is not operating at 100%, it can impact any one of these things, for example. I'm going to go through the bullets on the slide and give some examples for how the impact might affect a person in the school setting. So vision, if someone is blind or has a vision impairment, they may use screen readers to access their materials. Color blindness is also an important consideration. So you always want to ensure your document has good contrast. Hearing, if someone's deaf, hard of hearing, or even in a case where English is their second language, they will benefit from captioning services and having access to captions on any videos shown in class or presented on a website. Movement. If somebody is mobility impaired, we want to ensure that there is appropriate seating and access to the areas, classrooms, or areas where presentations are given. Thinking, remembering, and learning, our next three bullet points. Disabilities that impact thinking, remembering, and learning will always benefit from simple language, alternative descriptions, and visual graphs. Mental health. People who have mental health disabilities may need more allowed absences, flexible deadlines, alternative testing, and frequent breaks. Social relationships. Some students who struggle with social relationships, for example, they benefit from having alternate options to group work or group assignments.
So there are also situational or temporary disabilities. So let's take a moment to think about this. All of the disability types listed can either be permanent, temporary, or situational. This visual from Microsoft's Inclusive Toolkit breaks down disabilities related to touch, sight, hearing, and speaking in categories of permanent, temporary, and situational, and gives examples of each. This gives a viewer a good understanding of the scope of both our abilities and disabilities, as well as environmental or situational impact. A person with a disability of touch could have one arm, an arm injury, or be a new parent. Someone with a disability of sight might be blind, have cataracts, or be a distracted driver. Hearing could be representative of somebody who is deaf or has an ear infection, which is temporary, or be a bartender in a loud bar. And speaking could be someone who is nonverbal, has laryngitis, or has a heavy accent. The question is, how would you design your instruction if your materials and the prospective audience had these 12 people in them? I said that wrong, but sorry about that. How would you design your instruction for your materials if the prospective audience had these 12 people in them? You would want to include everyone, right? How would you do that? Any thoughts or ideas? You could put in chat, any questions in chat as we're going. Ellen is keeping an eye on chat if anything comes up. Another important consideration is the appearance of disability. Have you ever heard someone say he doesn't look disabled? It's important to keep in mind that some disabilities can be identified visually, such as injured limbs, paralysis, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy. However, the majority of disabilities cannot be identified visually. A person who looks like you or me could actually be disabled in some aspect of their lives. And as I had mentioned earlier, I'm an example of this. By looking at me, you wouldn't think I have a disability. I honestly don't think of myself as that, as having a disability day in and day out. However, having epilepsy my whole life and now having migraine, some days I am typically functioning. And however, if environmental factors are at play that I had mentioned earlier, such as strong perfume or flickering lights, I could experience seizure or migraine symptoms and be far less functional than I am on a typical day. So you never know what someone is dealing with on a daily basis. PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder, is another very good example of that. From the outside, a person with PTSD may look like and be typically functioning as a person. However, if triggered by an experience or sudden sound or phrase, that person may function in a manner not conducive to them completing their academic tasks. That student may have an accommodation requiring that they take tests in a test center rather than a crowded room. Another thing that comes to mind for perhaps for PTSD is I wonder how that would impact a person wanting to use a VR headset, a virtual reality headset. So if you're using something like that in a classroom or training situation, ensuring that students have an alternative way to participate in the learning or the activity that you're putting forth is equivalent, and that it's equivalent instructionally or informationally is very important.
So there's challenges around interacting with somebody who has an undisclosed or undiagnosed disability. Sometimes it's just because the person, as we said earlier in our poll, does not want to call attention to themselves. In other cases, it's been overlooked or undiagnosed. Due to financial means and access to testing and services prior to college, many disabled individuals may not have a documented disability. This would mean that they're not eligible to get accommodations until they've undertaken neuropsychological testing. At UMass, at the Ross Center, we will refer students to neuropsychological testing sites, both on and off campus, but the point, it still remains. These diverse individuals' needs for access are still important. Instead of retrofitting content after receiving notification of accommodation, these specific people would benefit from inclusively designed material. Thus, the need for all of us to move forward in designing inclusive and accessible material is huge. When content isn't inclusively designed and accommodations are required, often making content accessible requires that the Ross Center send content to a vendor to make it accessible. This could take time, which could put students behind in completing their deliverables, decreasing the likelihood of success in the course, increasing anxiety for the student, and potentially impacting their health and academic career overall.
Really important. It's important information.
So one way to look at this is to ask if we are including all learners or are we unknowingly excluding learners. Often when talking about accessibility, you hear the terms inclusion and exclusion. When something's accessible, it results in inclusion. When something isn't accessible, it results in exclusion. In just about everything in life, we're either included or excluded, whether it's intentional or not. And what's important to remember is that sometimes exclusion is temporary, such as a short-term injury. Sometimes exclusion is situational. Linda used herself as an example earlier. All it takes is an environmental change to trigger symptoms of her disability. And that's true for many students with disabilities. More examples of the situational are if someone's driving in a car and they can't read their materials, but they could listen to them. So when I take the train, I can't always hear the audio and videos I'm trying to watch, but I can read captions. So although the disabled community needs inclusive design for success, it's not just people with permanent disabilities that we should have in mind. We can see how all people benefit from this inclusion and inclusive design. It's all learners who are potentially served and positively impacted by designing accessible instruction. Important to note, people who are multilingual learners for whom English isn't a first language also hugely benefit from inclusive design, such as captions, transcripts, and tags on images.
Before we get into the importance of inclusive design and accessibility, I thought I'd share some statistics here. And that, according to the US Census, the US Census's American Community Survey, the ACS, In 2021, 13% of the civilian population reported having some form of disability. And at the Ross Center, Katie has told me that the numbers have increased significantly since 2020. That in spring 2023, 850 students used the Ross Center for disability services. Quite a lot.
And I think it's important to kind of call back to our other slides that's 850 students who have documented disabilities and accommodations. But as we said, there could be many more. We know there are many more who are not registered with Ross Center that still would benefit from the inclusive design.
Right, and we talked about this, and we were thinking that this could be a combination of the increase in mental health diagnoses since that time, since the pandemic began, and perhaps the increase in online instruction taking place. So there is more of a need to access online materials. Therefore, those online materials being accessible is even more important. And more people going to the Ross Center for assistance for that. Another important thing to consider, and it's not on the slide here, but I thought this was a really interesting piece of information. I found this piece that says among the 38 million people who are 25 and older and report having a disability, 6.7 million or 18% held a bachelor's degree or a higher degree in 2019. This is considerably lower than the 36% of the population who does not report having a disability and held a bachelor's degree in that same year. So that's something to think about.
So when we're thinking about the impact of inclusive design, of course, we're first and foremost thinking about the fact that all students are being included, and that's important. But there are also other benefits just as a person who's leading a classroom. For example, increased engagement. So the studies show that improved student engagement and participation is often connected to inclusive design. Higher student success. Obviously, the students are going to be more likely to succeed and achieve their goals when they are given more options and more inclusive designed materials. And then finally, it improves the campus climate overall because we're promoting diversity, which is something that's very important at UMass, and we're welcoming supportive environment that includes all learners. I mean, this is only going to benefit the morale of everybody at the university. So next, I wanted to tell a story that I came across in my research that I found really interesting. In the book Mismatch, How Inclusion Shapes Design by Kat Holmes, she writes about the ways inclusive design can expand our thinking about the ways that we use tools and programs. And she cites the example of one of the first typewriter machines that was a tool that was created to help someone who was blind communicate with another person. So she writes, one of the first typing machines was invented with a woman named Countess Carolina Fantoni de Fiziano in the early 1800s. She was a friend and lover, according to some sources, of an Italian inventor, Pellegrino Turri. The Countess was slowly losing her vision at a time when the only way someone who was blind could send letters was by dictating their note to another person. And then that person would transcribe it to paper. But they wanted to keep their communications private. So Countess and Turri invented a machine that could be used to write notes by pressing a key for a letter, raising a metal arm which presses into carbon paper. And this invention made writing accessible to people who are blind because they could feel the text. But also, we know this many derivatives have evolved over the year and over the centuries to modern day keyboards and mobile devices and communicating. So I like this example because what was designed to be inclusive to these people has changed the way we communicate, hugely. One of the biggest inventions that's changed how we communicate.
That is very cool. I like that example. So there's a story behind this image that I want to share. And I once took a user experience design workshop, and my assignment was to develop 4 personas. For those who don't know, personas are fictional characters which you create based upon your research in order to present the different user types that might use your service, product, or site or brand in a similar way. So I was trying to build my personas, and I wanted them to represent the diverse learners in higher education, particularly in relation to people with disabilities. I struggled with this for a while, and then to better wrap my head around the task, I just started putting together this chart. Across the top, I placed the most commonly used inclusive design considerations relative to content and course. Using headings on text so a screen reader could easily navigate a body of text similarly to how we scan a page with our eyes. Adding alt tags and descriptions to images for screen reader users so they could better understand the visual content that we're using. And captions, narration, and transcripts for videos that someone who couldn't hear can read the text and comprehend what's being communicated in the video. For course organization, I included concise titles, consistent navigation, and what Ellen and I like to call reverse ordering. So students, and it pertains to the weekly sessions in a course, so that students can see the current week's activities at the top of the screen, opposed to scrolling down to the bottom. So I then, to the left, listed some, definitely not all, developmental and situational disabilities. Based on my own experience and logic, I filled in each cell to indicate N, or dark blue, for a needed design element, B, or light blue, for design element potentially benefits, and D, or white, for design element doesn't directly benefit. What I learned is that there are very few of the basic universal design elements that don't have the potential to benefit users. And that the most design elements benefit most individuals. From this chart, I was able to write the description for the 4 personas and get my assignment done, which was really good. But I've also used it since then to when I'm talking with faculty about why inclusive design and universal design is important. So take a few seconds to look at how few of the cells have no shading whatsoever and don't benefit users. And my hope is that when weighing the pros and cons of designing digital materials inclusively, people will think of how many people both need and benefit from it. So now we have another poll to ask you some questions about what you might do. So when you make digital content, which of the following do you include regularly? Headings, alt tags or images, for images, I mean, descriptive hyperlinks, minimal use of tables. And yes, I use this as I'm showing an example of a table. Tables are not easy for screen readers to navigate through unless they're designed appropriately. And we usually recommend minimal use of tables. So contrast checkers or all of the above. So we have one person who uses headings. I haven't seen many. There's only one response though to the poll. If you could just take a second to respond to the poll. But let us know if you don't see it.
I think there's a extra question on the poll, so apologize for that. It just says choice 1, choice 2. But if you focus on the first question is what we're really hoping you'll answer.
Oh, yes. You know what? I didn't even see that additional question. Oh my goodness. Sorry about that.
That's okay. we've got 6 people have participated, 7.
Okay. So it's just, the only reason we're doing this poll is we're not trying to judge or anything. We're just trying to just get you thinking about the elements that we just discussed, and see which ones maybe you're already using or might want some help with. So
I'm sharing the results now.
okay, so some use headings, someone uses headings, someone uses minimal use of tables. That's great. You know, there are,
Katie, I'm not
going
seeing
over.
it.
You're not seeing the poll?
No. Katie announced that she was sharing. Now I see it.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
so maybe that's why only a few people responded. Sorry about that. But yeah, we're going to be going over more in detail these elements of inclusive design in this week's sessions. So we invite you to come and join us with that. So we could stop sharing and go to the next slide.
Okay. So this side is about the cost of exclusion. The pictures aren't showing up yet, though. I don't know why, Linda.
I don't know why either. I'm just going to go back and forth because they're showing up on my.
I don't know.
Well, that is
I don't see them.
that
It's like
is an interesting coincidence, don't you think?
it is. I
We
can talk
put nothing on this slide, so that
The pictures are excluded.
exactly.
oh dear.
So I'll talk a little bit about what we list as the cost of exclusion. Academic success is one cost. So when students are excluded, they struggle academically, they experience learning gaps, and the cost is academic success. The next is confidence. In addition to not experiencing academic success, students that maybe have, for example, limited mobility could face barriers that prevent them to attend and participate, which impacts the confidence they have in their learning. Something's happening with the images now. Okay.
Yeah, I put them in.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So that not being able to be there actually impacts people's confidence. And then access. Students not having the ability to access accommodations or support, which could prevent them from fully participating in learning experiences. Without that access, students sometimes leave school or drop out. Retention is lost. So as Linda mentioned, when students come to the Ross Center with a request for accommodations, the result of having access to accessible content isn't always immediate. We do get it as fast as we can, but sometimes that little lag of time can make a big difference in a student feeling that success and the confidence. And so here, creating it inclusively from the get-go is going to help so the student doesn't experience any lag.
So in this image, we are presented with 3 different looks at accessibility. The first could be the standard approach, and everyone is able to access the board. So we think it's called, we refer to that as fairness. So fairness is you have a board, you ask people to go up, and with the abilities they have, they go up and they attempt to access the board. But as you can see, the person who is sitting in a chair cannot access that board. The second picture shows us how accommodations can help. So with the person who was a little shorter, has like a little block to stand on, and the person in a chair had a ramp that it appears was so steep someone would have
¿qué tal si vas y lo cambias y nos vamos para allá?
to the ramp. And the third demonstrates inclusive design, which is basically lower the board. So we wanted you to see that difference drawn out: fairness, equity from accommodation, or inclusive design? Which one do you think makes all students feel pretty good about themselves? I guess it's the last one. And if you're curious, the image description is as follows. 3 illustrations show the difference between fairness, equity from accommodation, and inclusive design. Each has a whiteboard of 3 people in front of it, one shorter, one taller, and one that's seated in a 4-wheeled walker. In the first picture showing fairness, only the tallest person can easily write on the board. The person sitting on the walker would have to write on the wall below the board. The second picture is showing accommodation. And so this is how descriptive you can be with a tag. And the shorter person is standing on a block and sitting on the walker raised up with the ramp. Now everyone can write on the board. So the last picture showing inclusive design just shows the lowered board, as we had said earlier. And this is taken from otis.libguides.com/accessibility. So
Sorry, I lost my mute button. I'm back. Okay. I was like, oh my gosh, I need to go now. Inclusive design. So in short, we really want to make sure that we are creating things that all people can access, regardless of any physical, learning, cultural background, age. It benefits everyone by providing access to the broadest range possible of resources and also perspective. So, that's when we start to think about equity beyond disability as well. With inclusive design, diverse learning needs are anticipated upfront, as opposed to retrofitted. Designing with diverse learning needs in mind enhances the learning environment, fosters greater learning outcomes. As I said earlier, greater engagement, greater student success, there are just tons of benefits. Inclusive design, it looks beyond what is traditionally considered normal, quote, heavy quotes around that, and redefines the standard to be more accommodating and accepting. And this is the direction we all want to move in.
And students on campus have an excellent multi-tiered resource for their success on campus with the Student Equity, Access, and Success, which includes the Ross Center for Disability Services, the Center for Academic Excellence, Career Services and Internships, Student Support Services, Asian American Resource Office, Success Boston, pre-collegiate programs, and academic and career engagement and success. Some final thoughts. Since 1990, when the Americans with Disabilities Act was passed, Title II of that act required that all state and local governments ensure that persons with disabilities have access to the pedestrian routes in the public right of way. As a result, curb cuts, the ramps at the end of a sidewalk, which allowed people with wheelchairs the ability to cross the street from one sidewalk to the next, were part of the sidewalk design. This design not only benefited people using wheelchairs, but people with injuries, parents with strollers, pedestrians and scooters, delivery people, etc. All used curb cuts. So many people, for different reasons, benefited from this element of design intended for one group of people. This was called the curb cut effect, and curb cuts by function became an element of universal design. The same way curb cuts help so many people, your course or content can provide your students or the audience that you have for your content the ability to understand the material as you intended, if it's universally designed for all learners. Again, I'll refer to Microsoft's Inclusion Toolkit, where Principle 3 is solve for one, extend to many. Rather than fixating on disability types, we'll reach the most learners when we focus on what's universally important to all.
So we hope that we have kind of whetted your interest in learning more about creating inclusive content. The next few sessions in the design series are oriented to kind of help you take the next steps to making your course accessible. We do have a final poll for you, and it's kind of a check-in point about where you think you are with the materials that you use, if you know, where you feel you are in the inclusive design process, so to speak. So I'm going to launch that. And the question is, where do you think you are with making your content inclusive? And your options are, my content is great, I don't need to make any changes. Another option, I might need to make some changes, but I think I have a good idea of what I need to do. Another, there are a few things I'd like to tweak, but I'd like some help in doing that. And fourth, I want to make my content inclusive, but I need lots of help. We've got 4 out of 7, 5 who've participated. Thank you guys.
Yeah.
6. Should I share results now?
Sure. Thanks.
Okay. All right, should be up.
Yeah, so most of you said I need to make some changes, but I think I know what I need to do, which is great. There are a few things I'd like to tweak, but if you'd like some help, I'm here to help you, and everyone else from the learning design team is here to help you with that. And including, you know, if you really want to make your content accessible, but you're really not sure where to start, then we would suggest going to tomorrow's session on making your content accessible. Wednesdays we'll address making courses accessible, so it's more toward faculty, but tomorrow is for everybody, and including students who want to make sure that they're producing accessible deliverables for their course. So you can contact us. We could close the poll, I think, at this point.
Yep.
You can contact us at Learning Design Services, learningdesign@unb.edu, or if you have questions for the Ross Center, the ross.center@unb.edu.